I lived quietly for 30 years, tended my land, maintained the floodgate my father and I built with our own hands. I never went looking for trouble until the HOA showed up. They said my drainage basin was unsightly. They fenced it off, poured gravel, planted flowers, hung a banner, and cut a ribbon, called it the Serenity Garden. But they forgot one thing. That basin wasn't built to look pretty. It was built to save this neighborhood. I warned them 3 times. I sent floodplain maps, photos, emergency forecasts. I emailed. I spoke. I stood in their meetings. They ignored me, called me a stubborn old man, then buried the floodgate with stone and mulch. And then the storm came. Rain poured from the mountain. The basin swelled, and I stood there in the mud holding a brass key. And I opened the gate. Water roared through. The Serenity Garden was swept away in seconds. Brookstone Street collapsed. 5 homes lost to the earth. And no one could say I hadn't warned them. Now they call it a natural disaster. But the truth, nature didn't fail. It remembered. And me, I keep the gate open now. Not out of anger, but out of respect. Because the land doesn't need fences. It just needs someone to listen. I've lived on the edge of Elk Ridge Hollow for nearly 30 years. Long enough to remember when the road was gravel, when the oaks at the basin hadn't yet sprouted, and when the runoff channel behind my house still had a name, Dogwood Drain. Folks used to say it saved the neighborhood back in the floods of '92. Now most people in this subdivision don't even know it exists. Well, except for Madeline Brookstone. She knew. And she didn't like that it wasn't under her control. It started with a letter. A stiff, laser-printed courtesy notice slipped into my mailbox by one of the HOA's clipboard lackeys. It had that classic tone of false politeness, the kind that assumes you're too old to understand what's good for you. The HOA Landscaping Committee has approved a beautification plan for the lower Greenbelt near Lot 48. This area, while historically unmanaged, has been reclassified as community common ground. Access to this space will be restricted to HOA-approved personnel during the improvement phase. Lot 48 is my house, my land. And Lower Greenbelt was their fancy way of saying my drainage basin. I stared at the letter so long my coffee went cold. Then I walked outside, down the familiar trail past my shed, and looked at the gate I'd built with my father in 1995. Still bolted to the same rusted hinges, still stained with the silt of 100 storms. Beyond it lay the flood channel, a wide, grassy dip in the earth designed to capture runoff from the hills above. And now it had 2 neon orange plastic stakes marking project boundaries. That same afternoon, I caught sight of the crew, Karen's people, a couple of teenagers in HOA vests hammering in signs and stringing flimsy caution tape across the old gravel maintenance path. One of them was spreading mulch over the runoff trench like it was some flower bed. "You boys know what you're doing?" I asked, trying not to sound hostile. The taller one froze, looked back toward the road, then stammered, "We're just following HOA plans, sir. It's going to be a pollinator garden or something. A garden. On the emergency overflow trench that drains half the mountain." I walked back to my house, chest-tight, hands shaking. This wasn't about landscaping. This was Madeline claiming control of what didn't belong to her. You'd think, after all these years, they'd leave me alone. I never joined the HOA. Never needed to. My parcel predates the subdivision by a good 40 years. And when they started building in 1993, the county gave me a legal exemption, grandfathered rights, full access, and ownership of the flood basin, along with the key to the old steel floodgate that sat buried beneath a slope of rock and grass. My dad helped design it when he worked for the county back in the 70s. When the subdivision started popping up around me, we made sure everything stayed legal and documented. I've got the survey maps, the deeds, and the floodplain certifications to prove it. Karen's HOA. It was built on top of all that with zero authority over my land. But people like Karen don't care much for maps or history. They care about control. The next week, a metal fence went up. A real one this time, black iron bars cemented into the earth right across the trail that led to the floodgate. They'd painted it eco-green and added a decorative sign that read, "Elk Ridge Serenity Garden, private HOA access only." I nearly choked when I saw it. The worst part wasn't the fence. It was the fake brick path they laid over the spill trench. Brick! As if the water wouldn't care. As if a few inches of rain wouldn't peel that up like a sheet of stickers. I called the county office, left 3 messages. When someone finally called me back, it was an intern who didn't know what a drainage easement was, said he'd look into it. So I walked up to Karen's house myself. She lived 3 doors up the hill in a cookie-cutter colonial with flower baskets on the porch and a white mailbox shaped like a barn. Her lawn was always trimmed to regulation length. Her Cara black Lexus hybrid sat, gleaming in the driveway like it had never known dust. I knocked. She answered wearing tennis whites and a face like lemon juice. "Russell," she said, voice tight. "If this is about the garden, that's not a garden," I said. "That's a drainage basin. It's engineered to hold runoff when the hill floods." She blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. "It's unsightly. It attracts insects. It's been neglected for years because it's supposed to be clear. It's designed to drain." Well, she said, folding her arms. "I don't see your name on it." That made me laugh. I shouldn't have, but I did. You will. County Records, Book 748, page 12. I suggest you look it up before you end up underwater. Her eyes narrowed. "Russell, I understand you're passionate about drainage. But this community has evolved. We're trying to build something beautiful, something cohesive. You'll build a lake if you keep this up," I said. "And it'll be your street that floods first." She shook her head with a smug little smile. "Then maybe you shouldn't have let it become such an eyesore." That was the last thing she said before shutting the door in my face. That night, I sat in my garage with the old survey maps spread across the workbench. Red ink from my father's hand circled the boundaries. Dotted lines showed the direction of flow. The floodgate was marked with a black star. He always told me the land would fight back if you tried to tame it without respect. Rain has no HOA. By morning, the weather had turned. Thick clouds stacked over the mountains like bruises. You could smell it coming in the air, damp pine ozone, and the weight of something old waking up. The news talked about unseasonable rainfall. I knew better. I'd seen these storms. In '97, one like it had dropped 4 inches of water in 6 hours. The basin held. But only because the gate was open and the trench was clear. Now it was blocked with brick mulch and Karen's decor, and I was locked out. Or so she thought. What Karen didn't know was that the real floodgate wasn't at the trail entrance. It was buried deeper in the slope. A steel hatch my dad and I had welded in when no one was watching. One that only I could open, with the brass key I still kept on my belt. The land remembers, and when it rains, it doesn't care about fences or garden paths. That storm was coming, and the gate was waiting. By dawn, the rain started falling like it remembered something. It wasn't heavy yet, not the kind that rattles rooftops or wakes you in the middle of the night, but the first slow, deliberate drops tapping on the gutter gave me a feeling I hadn't had in years. The kind that comes before a test, before a reckoning. I threw on my rain jacket boots and grabbed my field notebook. Old habit. Before retirement, I'd walk creek beds and drainage sites for the county. After big storms evaluate flow check sediment, lines report damage. I knew how water moved. I knew what happened when people forgot. And Karen, she had forgotten, or maybe she'd never known. By the time I walked down the path behind my shed, the mulch she'd laid across the trench was already dark with water. Small rivulets cut their way through the wood chips looking for the path they remembered, only to be blocked by decorative stones and a wooden bench white, pristine and absurd. I stood at the new fence they'd installed, the one they said beautified the neighborhood. It was already leaning, mud collecting at the posts. I counted the degrees of tilt. About 6, maybe 7. That fence wouldn't last the week. But I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I walked back home and opened the folder labeled Dogwood Files. Inside were the documents I'd kept for decades. Engineering specs, county letters, even the floodplain modeling maps my dad hand-colored before computers did it all. Page 3 had a red stamp, Owner Maintained Infrastructure. Private parcel exempt from HOA. I scanned it, emailed it to the HOA board's shared address, and copied the county infrastructure department while I was at it. The subject line was simple: imminent drainage violation. Elk Ridge, Serenity Garden. I followed it up with a second email attaching the floodplain permit number and a historical rainfall chart from 1997. In the message body, I wrote just one line: "If the basin fails, it won't be because I didn't warn you." 2 hours later, Madeline Brookstone was on my front porch. She didn't knock. She rang the bell like it owed her money. 3 sharp stabs. I opened the door and found her standing there in a rain poncho that looked expensive and useless. Behind her was a man I recognized from one of the landscaping crews. Young, nervous, holding a clipboard. "Russell," she said, "we got your email. You're scaring people." I raised an eyebrow. "Good." She blinked. "Excuse me," I said. "Good. They should be scared. You blocked a known flood channel." She laughed, but it was dry and stiff. "It's been dry for years. You're overreacting to a drizzle." The landscaper shifted behind her, glancing at the clouds. He knew. I handed her the printout of the parcel map with the red-stamped drainage overlay. "This is county verified. You're trespassing. Your fence, your bench, your mulch, they're all on private infrastructure. If your street floods, it's on you." She didn't even look at it. Just waved it off like pollen in the wind. "This is a community matter now." The HOA board voted unanimously. It's part of our Green Corridor initiative. The neighborhood supports this. The neighborhood doesn't have legal authority over land it doesn't own. "Russell," she said, stepping closer, "you're alone on this. No one wants to side with a cranky old man yelling about ditches." I looked past her toward the clouds, rolling heavier over the hills. "It's not a ditch," I said. "It's a warning." By Friday, the situation had escalated. Karen brought in a new crew. Not kids this time, contractors. They had vests, trucks, and machines. I stood at the edge of my property line as a small backhoe began digging shallow retention pits where the natural trench once lay. Percolation zones, Karen explained at the HOA meeting that night, for ecological water absorption. Far more sustainable than outdated drainage ditches. I asked to speak. She denied me. "You're not a dues-paying member," she said. "This is HOA business." The other board members didn't even look at me. Some of the neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, but no one spoke up. I walked out. The rain picked up that weekend. It didn't fall all at once like a monsoon. It was worse, slow and steady, the kind that seeps into everything. The kind that builds. The kind that saturates soil before the real deluge comes. I stood at my back window and watched the water collect in the false garden. The mulch was already beginning to float. Karen came by once more on Sunday. She brought a laminated sign and nailed it to the HOA fence herself. It read, "No trespassing. HOA designated restoration zone." It was facing my direction. I didn't stop her. I just wrote the time down in my notebook, Sunday 4:47 p.m. Karen posts sign. Because part of me knew when the moment came, I'd need every detail. That night, I dreamed of the old flood in '97. Water running down the mountains like veins on a broken hand. I remembered how my father stood beside the gate wind, tearing at his coat, yelling above the storm, "Don't ever let them forget what this land can do." In the dream, I saw Karen standing where he once died. Only she was smiling. Monday morning, the forecast changed. It wasn't a drizzle anymore. The mountain weather systems had shifted. A converging atmospheric river was the term they used on TV. I knew what that meant. 4 to 6 inches of rain within 48 hours. It would be enough to test every drain in Elk Ridge, especially the one they buried in mulch and percolation pits. I went into my shed and pulled out the old floodgate key. Brass. Heavy. Still clipped to the same leather loop my dad wore in the field. I held it in my hand for a long while. The rain was already tapping on the tin roof like a metronome counting down. The gate was still buried, still hidden, still mine. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I walked the perimeter of my land by flashlight, checking every contour, every runoff path. The soil was already saturated. The hillside seeped like a sponge. If the real rain came, and it would, there was only one way the water could go. Straight into Karen's newly bricked-over Serenity Zone. And beyond that, her street. Those retention pits would overflow in seconds. The mulch would clog everything. And when the pressure built, it would punch through the weakest path. That was something Karen didn't understand. Water doesn't argue. It doesn't vote. It doesn't respect boards or boundaries or laminated signs. It just flows. And when it does, it remembers the old ways. So do I. Tuesday morning began with the kind of stillness that only happens before a storm when even the birds seem to know something's coming. I stepped outside with my coffee and listened. No wind, no movement, just gray skies pressing down on the hollow like a thick wool blanket. The air smelled of iron and wet pine. Then I heard the music. Not nature's music. Speaker music, classical strings, violins, loud enough to echo down the trail. I followed the sound toward the Basin boots squelching in soft mud. And there, in the middle of what used to be a gravel runoff trench, stood a canopy tent, a fold-out table draped in white cloth, and a half-dozen HOA members sipping sparkling cider from plastic flutes. At the center was Karen, no Madeline. She'd always insisted on being called that during formal events. She stood tall lips painted a shade too red for 9 a.m., wearing a sash that read HOA President, Beautification Chair. Her hair was pulled back tight, her raincoat draped over her shoulders like a cape, and in her hand, a pair of golden scissors. I stopped just outside the fence line and watched as she posed for photos beneath a vinyl banner that read, Elk Ridge Serenity Garden, Grand Opening. Someone clapped. A neighbor I recognized used to be friendly. A few others followed more out of social obligation than excitement. I recognized nervous smiles, people unsure whether to celebrate or cringe. Then she made a speech. Today she announced holding a wireless mic, like she was at a mayoral debate. We reclaim a forgotten space. What was once a neglected ditch has now become a symbol of progress, unity, and ecological responsibility. I nearly choked on my coffee. She gestured toward the mulch beds, the decorative stone pathways, and the absurd koi pond someone had installed in a low spot, completely ignoring that it was already filling with brown water. We are proud she continued to unveil this space as a cornerstone of our community vision, a place of peace, reflection, a gathering ground for generations to come. Then, she cut the ribbon. Applause followed, camera shutters clicked, sparkling cider was raised in toast. No one noticed me at the fence, until she did. She turned slowly, made eye contact, and smiled like a wolf in pearls. Then she raised her glass, mocking me, and said, To forward-thinking neighbors, I didn't respond, just turned and walked away. Because I knew something she didn't. That koi pond. It wasn't a pond. It was the basin's overflow pit, and it was rising. By noon, the first real sheets of rain arrived. Not gentle anymore. They came slanting sideways, driven by gusts from the mountain pass. Thunder grumbled overhead like an old grudge waking up. I watched from my back porch as water poured off the slopes above the subdivision. Small streams gathered at the edges of the new garden, cutting paths between the fake cobblestone and ornamental planters. The koi pond swelled. The mulch floated. The white ribbon that Karen had sliced an hour earlier now clung to the fence in soggy strips. I grabbed my notebook and started logging times 12:08 p.m. First overflow breach from uphill ridge, 12:17 p.m. Mulch dislodging near pond edge, 12:34 p.m. Standing water visible in overflow pit, 51 p.m. Drainage pipe fully submerged. By 1:30, my land was draining like it was built to. Water moved swiftly through the ditch behind my shed, flowing toward the floodgate buried below the hillside. The trench I'd cleared weeks ago glistened like a silver artery. Years of preparation quietly maintained, finally doing what it was designed for. But the HOA's fake channel, it was failing. The percolation pits filled. The new plants tilted. One of the benches collapsed sideways into the pond. I saw a neighbor Matt from 2 doors down staring at the scene, with a hand over his mouth. He caught me watching and gave a nod. Just one. The first sign that someone understood. Karen didn't call me that day, but I got an email. Subject line, Urgent Drainage Collaboration from Madeline B., HOA President Russell. Given the unforeseen weather conditions, we'd like to formally invite you to consult with the HOA Landscaping Committee regarding emergency water flow strategies. Please respond at your earliest convenience. Let's work together for the good of the neighborhood. M. Brookstone, no apology. No admission of fault. Just a flimsy attempt to drag me in now that things were going south. I didn't reply. Instead, I slid open the drawer beneath my workbench and pulled out the key again. Brass. Cold. I rubbed my thumb over the engraving on the side my father's initials. The time hadn't come yet. But it was close. At dusk, lightning cracked above the ridgeline. The power blinked out for 3 seconds. Then came back. Just long enough to make people nervous. The streets were slick. Driveways shimmered. Gutters overflowed. The koi pond gone. Now just a swirling mess of debris and garden stakes. Karen was outside holding a clipboard beneath a massive umbrella, shouting orders at her landscaping team. She was trying to dig channels clear blockage too little too late. I stayed where I was, because if she thought this was bad, she had no idea what was coming. I checked the forecast again. The storm system had stalled. What was supposed to move through in 12 hours was now sitting on top of us for 36. By morning, the hillside wouldn't just be wet. It would be bleeding water from every root and stone, and the only safe path left was the one she buried. Around 9 p.m., I saw flashing lights near the HOA clubhouse. Fire and rescue. Not an emergency yet just crews checking creek levels and advising residents to stay alert. The county knew the drill. They'd seen what these hills could do. I watched them take photos, point toward the basin. They didn't see me in the shadows standing by the gate listening to the water gurgling beneath the stone. The pressure was building. The land was remembering, and I was too. At midnight, I heard pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Karen's soaked, frantic mascara running like war paint. "Russell," she gasped. "The streets are starting to something's wrong with the drainage. The pit isn't holding." I think I let her talk. Let her spill words like the water spilling into her manicured garden. Then I held up the key. She stopped. "What is that?" I stepped forward, held it out between us like an offering or a warning. "This is what you tried to fence off. This is what you called unsightly. This is what's going to save your neighborhood, if you're lucky." She stared at the key like it was cursed. Then quietly she said, "Please." I didn't answer, just closed the door. Because I'd warned her 3 times, and tomorrow I would open the gate. By morning, the storm had settled in like a siege. Wind clawed at the eaves of my house. Rain came in sheets slamming sideways against the windows with a sound like fists on a drum. The creek out back wasn't a creek anymore. It was a lung-breathing water in long, thunderous gasps. I stood at the edge of my workshop, holding my father's key in one hand and a set of laminated maps in the other. Across the basin, the Serenity Garden was no longer serene. It was a brown lake, churning with mulch and broken benches. Karen was nowhere in sight. But I didn't need to see her to know what she was feeling. Panic. The kind that only arrives when your illusion of control shatters. At 7:42 a.m., my phone lit up with a text. "Matt H. neighbor flooding on Brookstone. Sewer lids popping. Street caving. HOA blaming storm surge." 10 minutes later, another Janelle C. County emergency volunteer Russ. "Is that basin still functional? Roads are blocked. We need confirmation." That was the word functional. It echoed in my head like a bell. Because the answer depended entirely on me. I threw on my slicker and stepped into the storm. The rain hit like needles. Every footstep sank an inch into soaked earth. Water streamed from the hillside like veins opened too wide. I made my way to the floodgate entrance, not the fake trail Karen had blocked, but the real one. The hidden one. A slope behind my toolshed led to a boulder with a rusted steel ring buried in its shadow. I crouched down, wiped the mud from the seam, and found the old latch. Still locked, still holding. I pulled out the key, brass, cold, etched with the year 1979. It slid into place like it belonged there, which it did. I turned it. The mechanism groaned, then clicked, a soft metallic sigh beneath the roar of the storm. And then the gate shifted open, not wide. Just enough. Enough to let the hillside breathe. Water gushed through the release pipe like it had been waiting years for this moment. The pressure made the earth tremble beneath my boots. It didn't explode, it exhaled. And the basin clogged with Karen's decorations and vanity finally remembered what it was built to do. Drain. From my vantage point, I saw it unfold. The overflow surged into the trench, hit the brick path she'd built, and shattered it like sugar glass. Decorative stones tumbled like dice across the lawn. The koi pond, ready swollen burst at the far end, sending a wave into the Serenity Garden sign and snapping it in two. Mulch gone, benches floating. The white arbor Karen installed. It tipped sideways and vanished into the flood like a shipwreck. And then the water found the breach, right where I knew it would, right at the bottom of Brookstone Street, Karen Street, the one she'd insisted on landscaping, the one that now sat directly in the path of redirected fury. I didn't watch it all. I turned back toward my house and radioed into the county dispatch. They'd know what was coming. I told them the gate was open. Told them it had to be. They didn't argue, because they knew me, and they trusted that if I said it was time, it was past time. 2 hours later, the news helicopters arrived. Circling low over Elk Ridge, they filmed the chaos unfolding on Brookstone Street. Entire yards had disappeared beneath brown water. Retaining walls collapsed. The end of the cul-de-sac where Karen's house sat proudly on its improved slope was now slanted, cracked at the foundation. The water had carved a new trench through her lawn. Her Lexus floated like a forgotten toy at the edge of a sinkhole. And people were talking. Not just residents, but county officials. FEMA. Emergency management. They wanted to know how a certified drainage system had been altered. Who had signed off? Who had allowed construction over a floodplain? The answer was simple. Karen Brookstone. That afternoon, I stayed inside while the rain finally slowed. There were knocks at my door. Neighbors. People who hadn't spoken to me in years. They weren't angry. They were asking questions now. Asking what they hadn't bothered to ask before. Did you really build the original gate? Is it true the HOA blocked it? Why didn't the county stop her? I answered. Everyone calmly letting the facts speak for themselves. I showed the maps, the ownership deeds, the emergency emails, the warnings. And finally, when someone asked what made me open the gate today, I said this because the land doesn't wait for permits. At dusk, Karen returned. She stood at the edge of the broken Serenity Garden, hair-soaked heels buried in mud mascara, a fading memory. She wasn't shouting anymore. She wasn't holding clipboards. She was just still, watching the water, watching what she'd refused to believe. I stepped up beside her, not saying a word. She glanced at me. You flooded it. No, I said. You did. I just got out of the way. She shook her head slowly, eyes glossed with tears or rain. I couldn't tell. They're saying I'm liable, she whispered. That I overstepped. You did. I didn't think... You didn't listen. We stood there a while. The rain was barely a drizzle now. The water still moved, but softer, calmer, like a storm that had finally said what it needed to say. Then I walked away, because there was nothing left to explain. Later that night, the county sent a crew to inspect the basin. They taped off the garden, marked it as a disaster zone, and called for a full inspection of HOA modifications. A FEMA rep asked to interview me the next morning. I agreed. And before bed, I added one last note to my field journal. Gate opened at 8:04 a.m. Brookstone breached at 9:47. Cause obstruction of natural drainage. Result reversion to original flow path, as intended. The storm wasn't just water. It was truth. And truth doesn't care how nice your neighborhood sign looks. It just finds its way. People think storms happen in an instant. One big wall of rain, one flash of lightning, and it's all over. But the truth is, storms build, quietly, patiently, like resentment. They gather in silence, stacking pressure until something gives way, just like I did. The first time I warned Karen Brookstone, it was with a county floodplain overlay in my hand and calm in my voice. That was strike one. The second time I sent the survey maps, included the floodgate specs, even highlighted the runoff path in red. That was strike two. The third time I stood at her front door and told her to her face, "You are building a garden on a live drainage system. The land won't forgive you for it." She smiled like I was speaking fairy tales. Then she poured gravel over my gate. After the flood, everyone started remembering those warnings. Funny how that works. Even the HOA board members, Brad Whitmore, Carol Lynn, Mark Vickers, they all started acting like they hadn't voted for the beautification plan, like they'd been misled. But I had their names on the meeting notes. I'd kept the emails. The motion passed unanimously, with Karen leading the charge and Brad handing out contractor cards like candy at a parade. And now they were holding emergency sessions under the guise of community rebuilding scrambling to rewrite history while the FEMA trucks still had mud on their tires. By Wednesday, the county sent inspectors. Not just building code guys, but hydrologists, too. Engineers with clipboards and rubber boots. I walked with them through the ruins of the Serenity Garden, pointing out where the trench used to flow, where the arbor once stood, and where the koi pond cracked open like a rotten egg. They asked about the floodgate. I showed them. They asked who authorized the blockage. I handed them printouts from Karen's own event flyers, HOA Grand Opening, Elk Ridge, Serenity Garden. It didn't take long for the engineers to start murmuring. One of them, a younger guy named Felix, pulled me aside. "You opened the gate just in time," he said. "If that storm had stayed overhead another 6 hours, the whole North Ridge could have gone." I nodded. My father helped build that basin. It's meant to release under pressure, not hold like a dam. He glanced at the collapsed benches and shredded signage. "You know this isn't just a violation. It's criminal negligence." I said nothing, because the land had already passed judgment. That afternoon, a neighbor named Ruth dropped off a pie. She was one of the few who'd spoken up before the flood softly in whispers at HOA meetings. A retired schoolteacher, quiet but observant. She stood on my porch in rain boots, holding the pie like a peace offering. "I'm sorry we didn't listen," she said. "We should have stood with you sooner." I opened the door wider. "Let her in." We sat in the kitchen sharing slices while the news played in the background. Footage of Elk Ridge ran on every local channel. The drone shots showed the ruined garden, the collapsed section of Brookstone Street, and the yellow tape around Karen's house now, visibly sagging on one side where the water had eaten the foundation away. They even interviewed a county official. Initial investigations suggest unauthorized modifications to a protected floodplain system, he said. "We are reviewing liability." That word again. Liability. Suddenly, HOA members were talking about bylaws, about emergency votes, about Karen's resignation. Funny. Just days ago, they called her visionary. Now they called her expendable. Later that night, Karen came back, not to yell, not to accuse. She stood on the edge of my driveway, soaked again, arms at her sides. I stepped outside, keeping a respectful distance. "I made a mistake," she said. Rain dripped from her sleeves. I thought it was just landscaping. I didn't know the whole street depended on it." "You didn't want to know," I said. "That's the difference." She looked away. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. No one ever does. But water doesn't care about intent." She looked back at me, tears mixing with the rain. "What happens now?" I thought about that for a long moment. Looked up at the clouds finally starting to clear. The sky beyond them was pale blue, the kind that only shows up after something violent leaves. "I don't know," I said. "But it won't be the same." She nodded and walked away. Thursday morning brought the letter. Certified mail from the county attorney's office. Inside a notice of pending civil inquiry into unauthorized land modification, obstruction of designated flood infrastructure, and failure to heed environmental engineering warnings. Karen's name was on it. So was the HOA's. I was listed as a witness. The neighborhood was quiet that day. Not the peaceful kind more, like the hush after a shout. Driveways still coated in dried silt. Sidewalks cracked. Yards ruined. People walking slower than usual, looking over shoulders. Whispers of lawsuits. Whispers of insurance denials. Because what happened here wasn't a natural disaster. It was an artificial one. Manufactured by pride. Signed off by people who thought pretty flowers mattered more than functional water flow. That evening, I walked the length of the old flood path. The broken garden was gone, returned to a muddy, ragged trench. The new channel cut by the flood itself followed almost exactly the original line drawn on my father's map. Like the land remembered. At the far end, the gate was still open. I'd wedged it with a steel bar to keep it that way until the inspectors finished their review. Water still trickled through, soft now harmless. But I knew it would rise again. And next time, the path would be ready. Before heading back, I picked up one of Karen's fallen signs. It was cracked in half, the words barely legible beneath layers of silt. Serenity Garden. I tossed it into the brush. The only serenity that mattered now was the kind earned by respect. Respect for land, for memory, for warnings given 3 times. The morning after the letter arrived, the skies finally cleared. Not just a break in the clouds, but real sun. Warm light spilled across the wet hills like a blessing. Birds returned. Pine needles steamed. The basin still shimmered with standing water, but it was retreating, pulled slowly through the gate I'd pried open 3 days before. I stood on the bank above it all, watching the land breathe again. Water moved where it was meant to move. Gravity doing what it always had, no matter how many fences they'd tried to build against it. And still, no one came to close the gate. They wouldn't dare. Because now they knew. I hadn't planned on being the keeper of anything. I came to this house to disappear. After retiring from the county after a lane passed after the kids moved east, I wanted quiet. I wanted the creeks and trails and soil that remembered my name. The same trails my father once walked, the same culvert he helped design. But the gate was always there, rusting under the surface, waiting for someone who knew what it was, someone who respected why it mattered. My father had called it the knife edge, not because it was dangerous, but because it cut both ways. Open it too soon and you drain the land dry. Too late, and it drowns everything below. That was the balance. That was the weight of the key. I found myself standing in the shed again, staring at the hook on the wall where I always hung it. The key. Still damp, still cold. I remembered the day my father gave it to me, August 15th, 90. The flood year. I was 34. The storm had just rolled through. County crews had cleared the basin, but the backup had come fast. A culvert down the line got clogged with debris and turned the neighborhood into a waiting pool. We spent 2 days pumping water by hand. When it was over, he handed me the key without a word, just a nod. The weight of that silence hit different now. I understood it fully. Because 3 decades later, I'd used the key again. Not out of anger, not for revenge, but because someone had to protect what others forgot. That afternoon, I got a knock at the back door. Not the front, the back, the trail entrance. It was Matt, the neighbor who'd texted me during the flood. Younger guy, early 40s, engineer for the county's utility department. Sharp, quiet. Always kept his head down during HOA meetings. But now he looked different. Like someone who'd seen too much too fast. I brought something, he said, holding up a waterlogged binder. Inside were blueprints, drainage reports, old HOA landscaping applications. This is everything they submitted over the last 2 years, he said. Karen signed every page. He flipped to a section marked in yellow. Project approval based on visual improvement. No hydrological assessment required. I raised an eyebrow. No assessment, he shook his head. They bypassed it, claimed the area was decorative. The board approved it without notifying the county. I whistled low. That's not just negligence, I said. That's obstruction. He nodded. It gets worse. One of the contractors Karen used. He's not licensed, no insurance. He listed his brother's business as a reference. I stared at the pages. All the signs were there if anyone had cared to look, but no one had. Not until it was too late. The next day, FEMA returned. This time with clipboards and cameras. They weren't just assessing property damage, they were documenting infrastructure violations. I walked them through the floodgate, designed the purpose of the basin and the sequence of events. Every photo I'd taken, every email I'd sent. They listened closely. One of them, a woman named Julia, with storm boots and a Texas drawl, stopped me halfway through. You're telling me this HOA built a garden on top of a certified flood release zone and then blocked your access to it? I nodded. And you warned them 3 times. She scribbled something on her pad. You got lucky, she said. Most of the time people don't have a gate. They don't have someone watching. I said nothing. Because it didn't feel like luck. It felt like burden. That night I didn't sleep. I kept replaying it all. The warnings, the ribbon cutting, the collapse. But mostly, I thought about the moment I stood at that gate key in hand, rain coming down like freight, and hesitated. Because I did. Just for a second. I stood there thinking, what if I let it go just a little longer? What if I made them suffer for what they did? And that thought, that darkness, it scared me more than the flood ever could. Because that's not who my father raised. He raised a man who knew that stewardship wasn't about power. It was about timing. It was about choosing the exact moment where action wasn't vengeance, but necessity. That's when I opened the gate. And I've had to live with that moment every day since. On Sunday, the HOA held a public meeting. First time in years, they invited everyone, including non-members. It was in the community rec center, still smelling faintly of flood mud and pine cleaner. Karen wasn't there. She'd stepped down the day before. Word had it she was lawyering up. Instead, Brad Whitmore stood at the podium wringing his hands like he wanted to be anywhere else. "We'd like to acknowledge recent missteps," he began. "There were decisions made without proper oversight. That's going to change." I watched the crowd, some arms crossed, some nodding, some looking for someone to blame. Brad kept going. "Going forward, we will be consulting qualified individuals for any land or infrastructure decisions. And we'd like to thank Russell Merrick for his, critical role in preventing further damage." I raised an eyebrow. Critical role. Like I was a firefighter who happened to be walking by. But I stayed quiet. Because the words didn't matter. The change did. After the meeting, people came up one by one. Apologies. Handshakes. Pie. Again with the pie. Even the ones who once called me a relic now asked for advice. "What should we plant to help the slope hold? Can you help us understand where the runoff goes? Can we map this together?" I said yes, because the land hadn't given up on them yet. And neither had I. That evening, I walked the flood path one more time. The water was low now, just a stream whispering through stone. I knelt by the gate and reached for the key, but I didn't turn it. Not yet. Instead, I placed it back on its hook in the shed and closed the door. Because the land was breathing again, and the gate it could rest, for now. When the second storm arrived, there was no announcement, no breaking news alert, no urgent text from the county, no panicked, Karen waving laminated signs, just silence. Then a single roll of thunder that shook the back windows like an old memory, knocking again. It was Thursday evening, 6 days since the first flood, and the land had only just begun to settle. FEMA crews had moved to the next town. Inspectors were compiling reports. The basin was stable. But nature doesn't wait for reports. I was in the workshop sorting through a drawer of old bolts when I felt that change in pressure. It dropped like a curtain. A hush fell outside, and I didn't need to look at the sky to know. Another round was coming. I stepped onto the back porch, hands still greasy, and saw Itfar on the horizon, bruised clouds stacked like mountains. No wind, just stillness, the kind of stillness that means trouble. By the time the first drops hit, I was already lacing up my boots. I didn't hesitate this time. I knew the trail well mud-packed from the last flood, but solid enough underfoot. The shed stood quiet as I opened it and reached for the hook on the wall. The key was still there, clean, dry, waiting. But it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a responsibility fulfilled. I made my way to the real gate. Not the path Karen had ruined, but the hidden slope my father and I had cleared decades ago. Water was already trickling through the runoff trenches, early scouts of what was coming. I crouched by the iron panel and listened. You can hear it if you know how. Not just the water, but the weight behind it, the pressure. I ran my hand along the old release handle, then slid the key into place. It turned smoother this time, like the storm itself had remembered me. I pulled. The gate shifted open with a groan so low it sounded like the earth itself exhaling, and the water came. Not in a roar, not a flash, but a steady, powerful flow surging from the hillside, threading through the basin, moving exactly where it was meant to move. I stepped back as the stream widened, wrapping around the berm, cutting a clean path toward the old spillway. A path no HOA could ever control. No landscaping could obstruct, because this was older than all of that. This was designed. And design, when honored, protects everything. From the ridge, I could see the town. Brookstone Street, still scarred from the first flood, now had sandbags lining the curbs. Neighbors had stacked them themselves. A new humility lingered on every porch. They'd asked me for advice this time, and they'd listened. They cleared debris from the runoff paths, unburied culverts, dug trenches with their own hands. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And as the gate flowed, I saw no panic, only movement, preparation, because they finally understood. Matt texted around 7:30. "Gate open," I replied with a photo. Water streaming down, glowing amber in the last of the light. He responded, "Thank you again." The storm hit harder than forecasted. Torrents by midnight. 4 inches in less than 3 hours. The kind of downpour that drowns cars and swallows basements. But not this time. Because this time the gate was open, and the basin was ready. I spent most of the night watching the monitors. I'd installed little waterproof trail cams aimed at key points: the trench, the overflow channel, the basin's edge. The footage was beautiful in its own way. Controlled chaos. Nature given room to do its work. Not resisted, not ignored, just respected. Around 2 a.m., I saw something that stopped me cold. On one of the monitors, down at the far end of the flow, I spotted a figure, standing in the rain, umbrella tilted back, soaked to the knees. Karen. She was standing near the remains of the Serenity Garden. Nothing left but stone and mud and the memory of bad decisions. But she wasn't posing this time. She wasn't performing. She was just looking, watching the water move, quiet. She raised a hand, not a wave, just a motion of acknowledgement. I didn't wave back, but I didn't turn away either. By morning, the storm passed. No flooding, no damage. Just a neighborhood still standing, and a basin that had done its job. Later that day, the county called. "Russell, we'd like to talk about a permanent solution," the voice said. "Your floodgate system saved Elk Ridge twice. The Board of Supervisors is considering a formal designation, possibly a historical protection status." I paused. "Not interested in plaques," I said. "Just let it keep flowing." He laughed. "Of course, but they're going to ask you to consult on some infrastructure reforms, design oversight, education, maybe even teach a few seminars." I considered that for a moment, then said, "I'll think about it." Because maybe the next keeper was already watching, and maybe it was time to pass the key. That evening, I walked to the basin one last time. The water was low again, peaceful. The flow gate stood open, rusted but proud. I didn't close it. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small brass tag I'd engraved the day after the first flood. I knelt by the gate and screwed it into the frame. It read, "Let the land speak, and listen when it does." Because the gate isn't just steel and bolts. It's a promise, and this time, we kept it. They called it settling damage at first. That's how the insurance reports phrased it. Neutral, clinical. As if the land had politely rearranged itself beneath Brookstone Street like shifting sheets in the night. But I knew better. I'd watched it happen from my back porch, the same vantage point I'd used for 30 years. The slope between the basin and the cul-de-sac had always looked stable-groomed lawns, perfect hedges, decorative fencing, but underneath it was all show. A thin crust over soft earth. And when the water came, it didn't roar like last time. It whispered, a slow undermining, a seepage. 1 inch at a time, it erased the lie. It started at number 14, Carol Lynn's place, corner lot, neatly landscaped porcelain birdbath out front. She'd been Karen's second in command. Voted to replace the runoff ditch with that cursed koi pond. I heard the crack before I saw the collapse. A sound like frozen branches snapping in spring. Then came the tilt settle at first. A gentle lean of the retaining wall. A slouch of the ground toward the basin. Nothing dramatic. But the next morning, her driveway was split down the center. A jagged smile across the concrete. County engineers arrived within the hour. They marked the edges in red paint. Drove in steel rods to measure movement, set up time-lapse cameras, and then they said it out loud. Active ground displacement. Another whisper for what it truly was: sinkhole formation. The stormwater hadn't flooded the homes, but it had saturated the land. The underground roots, loosened by Karen's landscaping, no longer held. And the decorative stones and pavers she'd used instead of compacted soil. They only accelerated the process. By day, 3-4 houses had visible cracks in their foundations. By day 5, the street itself began to dip 2 inches lower at the cul-de-sac than it had been a week earlier. And people panicked. I got a call from Ruth, the retired teacher with the pie. "They're blaming you," she said, voice tight. I sighed. "Of course they are. They're saying you opened the floodgate too much, that you overcorrected, that your runoff caused the instability." I looked out the window at the slow-moving stream flowing exactly where it was supposed to, exactly as it had been designed. They weren't saying that when the water passed through without flooding, I said. "I know," she said. "But some of them are scared, and fear looks for targets. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter with Matt. We wore boots, carried clipboards, took soil samples like the old days. I trusted his readings. The kid had sense. "You didn't cause this," he said. "The soil composition was already bad. Karen just sped it up. How long?" He shook his head. "Could be weeks. Could be tomorrow. But one thing's certain, this street isn't safe anymore. Anyone listening?" He gave me a look. "Not yet." But the land didn't wait. That night around 1:15 a.m., the street finally gave. It started with a rumble low and sustained like a growl rising from deep in the throat of the earth. I woke instantly, grabbed my boots, and ran outside. From the ridge behind my shed, I saw it clearly in the moonlight. Brookstone Street was folding in on itself. A section the size of a two-car garage caved inward, asphalt cracking like eggshell. Sod peeled back. A lamppost tilted and sparked, then went dark. Alarms screamed from nearby homes. A neighbor shouted. Then another. Within 10 minutes, emergency crews were on site. By morning, the news vans had arrived. They aired the footage on the 6 a.m. segment. Drone shots of a perfect suburban cul-de-sac now warped like wet cardboard. Driveways sunk. Sidewalks shattered. Karen's house still standing, but now perched precariously at the edge of the collapse like a cliffside lighthouse staring down the sea. The caption read, "Sinkhole Destroy Street in Elk Ridge Neighborhood." And below that, HOA President previously cited in drainage dispute. I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. A slow-motion confession carved into the land. That day, the county issued a full evacuation order for the lower end of Brookstone. 5 houses condemned. Utility lines shut off. No return date given. Karen didn't speak to the press, but her silence was loud. Everyone else started whispering the truth. She buried the floodgate. She ignored the warnings. He tried to stop it. We didn't listen. By the weekend, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Not in the rec center, outside, under a temporary tent in the park. Brad Whitmore, face pale, read from a prepared statement. "We have failed as stewards of this neighborhood. Personal agendas overrode expert advice. Pride eclipsed planning. Going forward, we intend to dissolve current leadership and place all infrastructure decisions under county review." He paused, then added, "And we owe Mr. Merrick an apology." I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just stood in the back, arms crossed, raincoat zipped, and let the words do their work. Because sometimes, the only thing louder than justice is the silence after it's delivered. That night, I returned to the gate. Water still flowed gentle and controlled. The land, despite its wounds, had done its part. Now, it was our turn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something new. Not the key, but a small plaque. I screwed it into the post beside the gate, under the first one I'd placed days ago. This one read, "Brookstone Street vanished not from rain but from arrogance." Then I stepped back and let the water keep flowing, because the gate was open, and the truth had nowhere left to hide. I didn't see Karen for 5 days. Not after the collapse. Not after the street fell away. Not after the evacuations, the media swarm, or the town hall where her name became synonymous with arrogance. She vanished, like her street. Her once constant presence, her voice at every HOA meeting, her signature on every newsletter, her face in every photo op was gone. No car in the driveway. No lights in the window. No motion behind the curtains. Just silence. And for a while, that seemed like enough. Until the subpoenas arrived. I was out back planting sedge along the edge of the Basin erosion control just in case, when Matt walked up with a manila envelope in hand. "County Attorney's Office," he said, offering it with a grim look. "Thought you should know they're going after her. Civil and criminal." I wiped my hands on my jeans before opening it. The letter inside was short, but dense legal citations, case numbers, deposition dates. Karen Brookstone was being investigated for negligent obstruction of certified drainage infrastructure, unauthorized modification of protected runoff zones, knowingly denying access to flood control mechanisms, causing measurable financial damage to county property and homeowners. The list went on. At the bottom, in a separate box, was my name. Russell Merrick, listed as a primary witness and property rights holder. I handed it back. I figured this was coming, I said. Matt nodded. She's lawyered up, but it won't matter. They've got the documents, the contractor statement, the HOA meeting minutes, and, well, you. I looked out toward the wreckage of Brookstone Street, still taped off, still unlivable. I didn't want this, I said. I just wanted to be left alone. Let the basin do its job. He gave a sad smile. She didn't just bury a floodgate, Russ. She buried accountability. The deposition was held at the county courthouse 3 weeks after the collapse. They set me up in a small room, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a pitcher of water on the table. A court reporter sat in the corner typing with mechanical precision. Karen sat across from me. She looked smaller. No pearls, no red blazer, just a gray suit that hung loose on her frame. Her hair tied back. No makeup. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Her attorney, a sharp-looking man from Denver, did all the talking. Mr. Merrick, would you describe the events leading to your decision to open the floodgate on the morning of May 12th? I did. Carefully. Factually. I showed maps, emails, weather reports, survey data. I gave timestamps, log entries, photos from trail cams. I explained the function of the gate, its legal history, and the 3 formal warnings I'd issued. When I finished, the attorney asked, "And you claim that Miss Brookstone was aware of the floodgate's existence and its significance?" I didn't even have to answer. Karen spoke. "Yes," she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She didn't flinch. I knew. He told me more than once. The attorney leaned in. "Ms. Brookstone," I ignored him, she said. "I thought it was his ego. I thought it was just old man paranoia." Her voice cracked. I was wrong. And just like that, the air left the room. The civil suit went quickly after that. Karen was removed from the HOA registry. The board was dissolved and placed under temporary county oversight. The Serenity Garden project was officially labeled a gross violation of environmental code. Her personal assets were frozen pending restitution claims. Brookstone Street homeowners had joined the suit en masse. And when FEMA released their damage report, it landed like a hammer. Total financial impact, $2.8 million. But that wasn't the end of it. Because the court wasn't just interested in fines. They wanted an example. And Karen Brookstone became it. A week later, the front page of the Elk Ridge Courier ran a headline, "In bold, HOA president faces jail time for drainage scandal." Below it, a photo of Karen walking into the courthouse, shoulders hunched, jaw tight. A woman once drunk on control, now consumed by consequence. And beneath it all, in smaller print, local resident Russell Merrick credited with preventing further disaster. I cut it out. Taped it to the inside of my shed door. Not out of pride, but as a reminder. That silence is dangerous. That warnings matter. That even in retirement, you can still protect what's right. People started knocking more after that. Not just reporters, but neighbors. Some I barely knew. Others who once called me difficult. Now they came with questions, clipboards, coffee. "Russell, can you help us plan new runoff channels? Can you show us where the water wants to go? What kind of plants stabilize the slope?" I helped, because that's what gatekeepers do. On a quiet evening about a month after the flood, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Neatly penned. "Russell, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you. You did what I couldn't. You stopped it before it got worse. I see that now. This place was never mine to control. I just couldn't let go of the image I had in my head. The perfect neighborhood, the clean paths, the trimmed lawns. I didn't understand that the land doesn't care about symmetry. It only cares about memory. You remembered. I forgot. That's on me. Sincerely, Karen." I folded it, placed it in the box where I keep old county maps, because maybe one day someone else will need to read it. And remember, a storm will always come again. But now the basin is clear. The gate is open. And the queen who once ruled with a gavel and a glare, she fell not because I fought her, but because she refused to listen. And nature has no patience for arrogance, only consequences. Summer came slowly that year. The kind of summer that doesn't burst in but eases its way through fog and wet ground, letting the soil dry on its own time. The basin filled with wildflowers, real ones, not the ones Karen had planted from store-bought seed mixes. These were native, honest. The kind that grow where they're welcome and die where they're not. The air smelled of pine and stone, of something older than fences or fines, of something permanent. I walked the trail behind my shed every morning now. It had become ritual, boots on wet ground, mist in the trees, a thermos of black coffee in hand, and a light creak in my knee with every step. And at the end of the trail, the floodgate. Not buried, not forgotten, still open, still working. There's something humbling about watching water do exactly what it was designed to do. The runoff from the upper ridgeline streamed through the channel we cut back in '79, through the sediment filter under the gate, and down into the secondary basin where it slowly rejoined the land. You can't fake that. You can't stage it with ribbon cuttings or garden parties. It either works or it doesn't. And when it works, when gravity and steel and earth all align, it's beautiful, not flashy, but quietly heroic. The county gave me a plaque last month, at a ceremony I didn't attend. They mailed it instead wrapped in brown paper and bubble wrap. The kind of thing that says we appreciate you, but don't want to owe you. It read, "In recognition of Russell Merrick for exemplary stewardship of public safety and environmental design." I hung it in the shed just beneath my father's old blueprints, not out of pride, but out of respect, because the real reward isn't in metal or ceremony. It's in the silence that follows a storm. The kind of silence that means nothing broke. The kind that means people listened. Brookstone Street is gone now, literally. The county tore up the remains last week, bulldozed the cracked pavement, pulled up the shattered curbs, and laid down gravel and native grass instead. They're calling it a controlled green zone now. Funny how names change when people learn the hard way. 5 families moved. 3 stayed and relocated up the hill. 1 rebuilt on stilts. Karen's house was condemned, sold at auction to the county for $1. She didn't fight it. No one knows where she went. But I hope she found peace somewhere far from gates. The HOA, it's quieter. After the board dissolved, the county installed a provisional committee, real engineers, not decorators. They held open meetings. Ruth joined. So did Matt. They asked for help, asked for history. And this time, they listened. They brought me in as an advisor, not officially, but with real weight. I sit in the back of their meetings sometimes, arms crossed, flannel shirt, calloused hands folded. I don't say much. But when I do, they write it down. They've started calling the Basin Merrick runoff corridor in the paperwork. I don't correct them. But I still call it Dogwood Drain, because names don't matter. Function does. Legacy does. Memory does. One evening in July, Matt brought his daughter by, 6 years old, curious eyes, tiny boots. He wanted her to see the gate, to understand where the water goes, he said. I showed her the lever, the overflow marker, the catch trench. I explained how rain on the hill ends up right here, filtered, controlled, released. She asked if the water ever gets angry. I smiled. Only when people ignore it. She nodded solemnly, then drew a picture in the mud with a stick. It looked like a river with arms. Maybe she gets it more than some adults ever will. I still carry the key, not because I have to, but because it reminds me that we all have gates to watch, responsibilities others don't see, warnings others won't hear. But that doesn't mean we stop giving them. Sometimes at night I sit on the back porch and watch the lights down in town. The new path where Brookstone Street once was shines softly under solar lamps. No cars now, just grass and wind. The land has reclaimed it, not with fury, but with patience, because the land always remembers what it was. It just waits for us to catch up. And me, I'm still here, still walking the path, still checking the flow, still listening to the rumble of far-off thunder like it's a language I was raised to understand. I don't need to sound alarms anymore. They do that themselves now. Because the neighborhood isn't blind anymore, and the gate remains open, always, right where it belongs.